Hello everyone, my name is Shannon Turner, and this will be an introduction to the Query Builder and how to get information out of the database in ActionKit. If you attended ClientCon 2019, then this presentation may be familiar to you. If you missed it, then this is your chance to see what you missed. Before we jump into building queries with the ActionKit Query Builder, let's talk really briefly about how ActionKit gets data in the database in the first place. When you create a page in ActionKit, we're storing lots of information about that page. What type it is, what's the title, what tags are associated with the page, are there any custom fields, what's the content, where does it go after you've taken action on the page? Do you send a confirmation email? And so much more. Similarly, when you create a mailing, ActionKit is also storing lots of information about that mailing. What subject line are you using? What's the content of the mailing? What wrapper are you using? So what's it look like? What tags are associated with the mailing? And maybe most importantly, who's going to be receiving this mailing? When a user interacts with one of your pages or with one of your mailings, we're storing that data as well. So if you sign up to get emails, and then you sign a petition or a letter, if you make a donation, if you share a page on social, if you forward an email to a friend, you receive a mailing, open a mailing, click a mailing, take action from that mailing, so much more. Every single action that you take along the way gets stored in the database somehow. Maybe we could even write that out as a sentence, and every underlined phrase here is one piece of information that gets stored. At every step in the scenario, we're storing information in the database. So a user, which user, received a mailing, so we know which mailing. They opened that mailing, they clicked a link in that mailing, we know which link they clicked on. On that page, which page they were taken to when they clicked that link, they took action, and then they received a confirmation mailing. Every single step in that process, we are storing information in the database. This is one way of visualizing some of the relationships between your members' data. There's interconnections and relationships between lots of different types of information. And I want to say, don't worry if you can't see all of the details. I know the screen size is small here. You're not meant to. That's not important, as it is seeing the interconnections between all of the different tables and structures of data. So generally, you would need to write SQL code, which is the database programming language, in order to get information from your database. But with ActionKit, we made the Query Builder to be a point-and-click way of getting that same information so that you don't need to write code. If you really want to, you can write SQL code, but also the Query Builder is a great option for those who don't want to. What we really want is to take all of that data, all of those relationships we saw in the previous slide, and flatten it out so we can create a spreadsheet of information that we can read, something that looks a little bit like this. In order to start viewing some of the data that we've stored about our users and our pages and our mailings, let's hop over to the Reports tab. And here on the right-hand side, I've expanded the Add Query menu. We'll be going there in a few slides as a way to create our first report in the Query Builder. But for now, I think one of the best ways to learn how to build a report is to look at reports that have already been built. We can look at how they were built and see what information they return, and then use what we've learned to make our own reports. So for now, let's go to Browse All. Here are a ton of reports, all of the reports that have ever been made, including those made by other staff members on your team. These include reports that are written in SQL, which is the code that reports are written in, but it also includes reports that are made with the Query Builder, which gives you a series of drop-down menus so that you don't need to know SQL in order to get your information from reports. Here, by clicking the WAWD standard filter in the right-hand sidebar, I can filter the results of these reports just to those that were shipped standard with ActionKit, the ones that come built in. These built-in reports, some folks don't even know that they exist, so I want to really highlight these because there's 300 reports in here that come standard with ActionKit, and I think these are great starting points for thinking about the different types of reports that you might like to make. Maybe there's already something that exists and you can use it right out of the box, or you can see what you need and remix one of the existing reports and then make it your own so it's exactly what you need. You can also search for reports here from the Browse All page. So let's search for one report in particular that I think is a really good one to start with. So let's search for users by district, and then we find the mailable users by congressional district, and click Copy to begin copying this report. And if you make a copy of a report, then you won't have to worry about messing up any of your existing reports. You can play around and test things. So let's say yes, let's copy it. So right now, this report is an exact copy of the mailable users by congressional district report. From the description, we can see that it tells us how many users we have per congressional district. And notice the red highlighting that shows that I'm renaming this report so that it has my initials. And you should do that too when you're making a copy of your report for testing purposes, because that way people know that, hey, this is my report and I'm using it for testing. So let's zoom in on some really important parts of that last screenshot, because there was a lot on that last screenshot and maybe we couldn't see all the details. So let's look at the query type. The query type in this case is users. This tells us what types of information we'll be able to retrieve with this report. This is a users query type, so we'll primarily be getting information related to users. Next, let's look at the display columns. This tells us what information we want to see when we run the report. The way this report is set up right now, it's going to give us two things. First, how many subscribers we have on our list, and second, which U.S. House district they're in. The filter criteria, which is this third section, that's going to limit the results to only records that match the criteria that we set. In this case, we don't have any criteria, so we're getting everybody. At the bottom of that page is Save, and when we click that, it'll save our report and run it. And here are the results of the report on the right-hand side. Now, this might be a review for folks, but I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And so pointing out things like the items in the display columns, that corresponds to the items that we get in our results. So we want to see the number of subscribers. Here we see the number of subscribers. We want to see the U.S. legislative district that people live in, and we can see which district they live in. So what this is saying is, tell me a count of how many subscribers that we have on our list per U.S. legislative district. Think of it as building a spreadsheet, and you get to choose the columns of information that you'll have in your results. So let's go back and make edits to our report. So to do so, let's click Edit Report. So we've run a built-in report, but since we made a copy of that report, we're free to change it up without worrying that we're going to mess up that report for anybody else. So let's add in a few columns here. If we click the drop-down menu where it says Add, we can add new columns. So let's say I wanted to see how many donors that we have in each district as well. You see the super light gray where it says totals? These options all relate to the total amount of things. So we can get specific information about individual users. We'll see how to add that later on. But for now, let's see the totals. I also added the sum of payments in addition to the number of donors. So we're going to see the number of subscribers and donors by U.S. legislative district and how much money each district gave. So when the query builder talks about payments and orders, think donations. Don't get tripped up by this jargon here. Orders include donations and product sales, and orders can be one-time or recurring. Orders that are one-time have one payment. Orders that are recurring have many payments associated with that one order. And now that we've saved that, let's take a look at our results. This is nice, but I think it's kind of annoying personally that the US district is in the middle of the other columns. I know that when I export this to Excel or Google Spreadsheets that I'm just going to be rearranging these columns every single time. That's annoying. Let's fix that. So if you click the three bars on the right-hand side that I have highlighted in red here, you can drag that up or down wherever you'd like the column to appear. So I'm going to drag the US Legislative District up so that it's earlier in the list. Here's an animation of how it's done using a different report. But I moved my US Legislative District to the first position, so it's going to be the first column in my report. And if we save and run this report, we see it's much better, and now I don't have to reorder it later on in my spreadsheet. If we go back to the Reports tab, I want to show you how you can find all of the reports that you've created. Up top, if you click Reports I've Created, highlighted in red here, you'll see only the reports that you've made yourself. This can be super helpful, and honestly, I wish I had found it sooner when I was a client. Also on the right-hand side, notice that I've expanded the Add Query menu. Let's take a closer look at that. Most of the categories that you see here will have some overlap with some of the others, but adding a query here lets you create a new report of that type. You have so many options that you can choose from. Now, if you write a user's report, that's going to have some information about, the users that you're trying to find. That's going to include things like donations that they've made, actions they've taken. So there's going to be overlap between users and actions and users and donations. So it's not just information about the users, it's also what they've done, right? But you can always change which query type you're using later on to see, which information you really need to get. So now that we've copied a report, we've got a good sense of how the basics work. Let's create our own report. Let's start with a user's report. I'm going to call this report Donors by Legislative District, and I'm going to put my initials in again. Including a description is really helpful as well, not only so that you can remember the reports that you've created and what they do, but also so other members of your team can see what your report does as well. And maybe if you have a great description, they'll find what your report does. They're like, oh, that's wonderful. I don't need to make my own report because Shannon's report already does exactly what I want. So last time we created a report, we added columns that represented the total amounts from the database. This time we want to see information about specific users. So when you go to add a column, you scroll down a little bit in that drop-down menu, and under the user header, find that user's name. Now, there's a lot of information to sift through in these drop-down menus, so you can also type to search for the columns that you want. If we type in email here, we can see that email address is an option, so we can go ahead and add in the email address as well. Let's also add in their US Legislative District as well. But if we want to get more specific information about where they live, things like their address and city, state, zip, that's all grouped into the home address option. And that's because there are so many options that you can choose from. And if it were all in this menu, you would be scrolling forever. So let's choose home address, and then we'll see how to specify just the information that we want. You might have noticed that many of the options that you've chosen have their own drop-down menus. Let's explore one of those. If we click the home address drop-down menu where it says full address with commas, let's click that, see what happens. Then it expands and we see, oh, we have so many different things that we can choose from. Maybe I just want to get the city. So let's choose the city from the drop-down menu. Now this column will only have this user's city in the results, not the full address. If you want to add multiple items, say for instance you want one column for city and another column for state, then what you'll do is you'll add another column with home address, and then you'll choose from the drop-down menu state/region or US state. Since this is a report about donors, let's add some columns that will tell us how much money they've given. If we scroll down to donations, you can see a variety of options about donations. Let's add a few here. So I want to add the sum of payments a user has made. You can also add the number of payments, or the average payment, or the date of the payment. You have lots of options. And now that we've set up our display columns, our filter criteria, that's still set to all records, meaning that we're not restricting our results at all. That was fine in the last report that we ran since we were limited by the number of US congressional districts. But this is going to give us one row for every person in our database, which maybe isn't what we want. Not only is that a ton of rows, but it would also tell us about all of the people who didn't donate any money. So now let's add some criteria to our filter. You can filter by things like a user's location, and with home address like before, you'd probably also want to then limit it by city or state. If you scroll down a bit, you can also filter by donations. So you could choose maybe the number of payments or the total payments. So I want to look at major donors, for instance, and you could say anyone who has given at least this amount of money. But if we want to look at small dollar donors, let's filter by the sum of payments and then adjust the criteria in the next drop-down menu to say it's at most $35. This information looks good, but the information is unsorted. We see that the donation amounts are not sorted by amount, it's not sorted by location. So let's sort this now. Clicking where it says unsorted will change it to sort by ascending, which is A to Z, or lowest to highest if we're talking about numbers. And if we click ascending again, that's going to change it to sort by descending, so Z to A or highest to lowest. And then clicking descending one more time would then set it back to unsorted. And so now we can see that our results are sorted as we expected by the state and then in ascending order. You can also include a field that will impact the sorting but won't be displayed as a column. So for example, we can sort by the total amount of money that they've given, but have that column be invisible. To do this, hold down the Shift key when clicking the sorting button, which will cause an invisible sort only indicator to appear. So a little bit of repetition can be a good thing. Let's recap all of that. So query types, those tell us what type of information we can see. Since this is a user query type that we've been playing with, we're going to see information about specific users or about groups of users, like our first query that we copied. Display columns allow us to choose specifically which information we want to see in our report. For instance, do we want to see the amounts of donations that were made? And then filter criteria allow you to limit your results. For example, you could say, only show me people who have given at least $250 in the last 12 months. So, since we're just using test data, these fake email addresses aren't really all that useful. I'm going to get rid of them by clicking the X on that particular column highlighted in red here. And if you wanted, you could also remove filters in the same way, and then you'd no longer be restricting your results by that filter. We click the X, and now that email address column is gone. And then we see that the email column is gone from our results. Now, let's add another piece of criteria to our filter. Here I have two screenshots. The top screenshot shows that we are saying, I want to include anyone who lives in the state of California. And by default, including a piece of criteria in our filter means that we require this. But by clicking on the green required button, it'll change to a red excluded button. So in the bottom screenshot, I'm saying exclude anyone who lives in California. I don't want to see anyone who lives in California. We also don't have to match on just the exact state. We could say, give me anybody who lives in any of these states. From your filter, click the is equal to drop-down menu and choose is in list instead of exact match. If you then delete California from the list, then you'll notice the help text highlighted in red here that it appears as a placeholder to guide you as to what kind of information you should put in there. And it tells us that it wants semicolon separated alternatives. So it's saying, give me anyone who lives in any of these states separated by semicolons. So if I enter in a list of states separated by semicolons, AK, semicolon, AL, semicolon, AZ, I'm saying, give me anyone who lives in Alaska, Alabama, and Arizona. So when you have two filters, it's saying, I want to filter on both of these. Someone who's donated a total of $35 or less, and they live in either Alaska, Alabama, or Arizona. By default, reports will pull everybody on your list, even if people are unsubscribed. Let's add another filter to make sure that we're only including people who are subscribed. So now I'm only including folks who are subscribed to the main email list. If you take a look at the box after as, where it has the name of the column, I've highlighted it here in blue. By default, it just gives the internal name of the column, but that's not always all that readable. So let's rename our columns. And here I've renamed mine to Sum of Payments. Here's an animation that shows how renaming columns works using a different report. And when we save, we can see that we've renamed our column accordingly, and it now says Sum of Payments. So this would be a good time to pause the video and try an exercise. See if you can change your report to filter just subscribed donors from California, New York, and Texas. Filter your donations to $35 or more. Rename all of your columns so that they're very readable, and then sort by largest donations to smallest. You can go ahead and pause the video. I will be here, and when you're ready, we can pick back up. So now, I'm assuming you've gone ahead, done the exercise, you practiced. Here's what the report looks like in the Query Builder. And if you want to check your work, now is also a good time to pause, take a look, see what you did. And your results will probably look something a little bit like this, though I'm using test data, you probably aren't. And if you click email or download results, you'll be able to download the results as a spreadsheet in order to open it up in Excel or Google Spreadsheets. You can also email yourself the results even if your report hasn't finished running yet. This can be especially useful for reports that take a long time to run. So now let's go back to Browse All and let's search for last month's donors. We're going to change gears a little bit. Now, like before, we're going to make a copy of that report. And now, this report is an exact copy of the last month's donors report. From the description, we can see that it tells us which donors, which users donated last month, and that you can use this report in your mailings targeting so that you don't ask people who have already donated recently for more money. The way this report is set up right now, it's going to give us the user ID. And the filter criteria right now says only show me users who have made at least one successful payment in the last month. And I know we've covered this before, but just to recap, think about it this way. If you were building a spreadsheet, what information would you want in that spreadsheet? The display columns will determine which columns appear in your spreadsheet, and the filter criteria will determine which rows appear in your spreadsheet. Our report currently tells us the user ID, which is fine if you're targeting a mailing, but what if you wanted to know more details? Let's add the name and the email address, and we can scroll down a little bit or use the type to search and get the number of orders that the user has made, which you'll find under the user's order history. Let's get the sum of payments as well. So we get the user ID, the name, email address, number of orders, and the sum of payments. Now if we actually run this, let's see what we get. This isn't the full result set. There's a bit too much to fit on this slide, but you get the idea and you can run the full report for yourself as well. And of course, I'm using test data. You are going to see very different data when you're running this. So now that we've seen some of the more straightforward edits to our query, let's add in some filter criteria so we can limit our results to only folks who have given a large amount of money at once. So here I have some filters. I'm filtering on both of these things, people who have made at least one successful recurring donation in the last month, and they've spent at least $250 in one go. This time, it's just a few folks who meet that criteria. Now we can go back to our report, edit it, and make some more advanced edits. Now, even though we're saying only show me donors who have given in the last month, we're still asking to see how many total orders these people have ever given on any date. So let's actually fix that. Let's actually ask to see the number of orders in the last month. Now it shows how many orders were received in the last month. We can do the same thing for the sum of payments. Change from on any date in that drop-down menu so that it reads in the last month. Now, there are real scenarios when you might say, show me all of the people who donated in the last month, and I want to see the total number of donations they've ever made. But generally, if you're filtering on a time period, make sure your display columns match that too. And you can see highlighted in red here that I've made sure that all of my time restrictions match. So this seems like another good time to do an exercise. First, we're going to change our report to show donations within the last year instead of the last month. And then we want to exclude anyone who has given more than $35 in the last year. And make sure you rename your column headers so that they make sense. Now is a good time to pause. I'll be here when you're done, and then we can check the work. Just kidding, we're not going to check the work. So let's take a look at another query type, the actions query type. Let's create a new report. Here I'm calling mine actions by page by tag, and for the description, this report will give us how many actions did a page receive for pages with a given tag. Generally, when we find ourselves trying to answer questions like how many actions did we have, we're talking about stats that we're going to find under totals, like in this screenshot. And when we're asking questions like how many actions did each page get, we're pairing that total with a page. This is similar to the example of how many people did we have in each congressional district from before. So we're going to display the page as our first column, and our second column will be the number of actions that that page got. And we'll sort the whole thing by the number of actions in descending order. When setting up our report, we said that we wanted to find the number of actions each page got for a given tag. So let's add a filter here that will filter by a page's tags. Now, I could enter in specific tags that I wanted to search on for this report, but I want to show you something really cool. If you leave this tag field blank, just how it is in the screenshot, then we actually be able to make our reports reusable. So what this does is it'll say, this action was on a page with any of these tags blank. If you leave this blank, save and run your report, then something special happens. It doesn't run right away. It pauses to ask you, hey boss, I'm about to tell you how many actions your pages got, but which page tags did you want me to look at? This allows you to make reports that you can reuse again and again without making edits in the query builder. Whenever you want to run this for a different tag, you just specify when you run the report. So here I can choose, and the menu will autocomplete, so I don't need to remember all of the different tags that are available to me. And so here I can, have all of my tags autocompletes, and I don't need to, have a big printed list of what all my tags are. This is what the results look like with the Green New Deal tag, but if you choose a different tag when you run the report, you'll get different results. Now, the last query report that we'll have time for today is the mailings type. For this report, we're going to go fast since we don't have a ton of time left, and let's just jump right in. Let's create a new report. I'm calling mine mailing performance by tag, SVT, and for the description, the report gives us the open, click, and action rates for mailings with specific tags more than a certain number of recipients. If this is a report about mailing performance, it would be helpful to see important stats about the mailing in our eventual spreadsheet. So I've included the mailing ID, the admin notes to describe the mailing, and when the mailing was queued to send. Next, let's get the performance statistics for this mailing. So how many messages were sent as part of this mailing, and what was the open rate? You'll find both of these under performance. For the open rate, let's click the as percent, and then we'll be able to get a little bit more specific with the decimal points. Let's add click and action rates, and let's do the same thing to get those extra decimal points for those as well. Finally, for our filter criteria, let's add performance, messages sent, and mailing has any of these tags. Both of these I'm leaving blank so I can specify the amount in tags when I run the report and keep this report reusable. And so if, I'm running this with test data, but if you run this on your ActionKit, then you're going to see very different results than what I have here. Just keep that in mind, any of these reports that you're running. Next, we're going to talk about report categories. Report categories allow you to categorize your reports. Think of them like you would tags that you apply to pages or mailings, except these are separate and they're specifically for reports. Some report categories add extra functionality. For instance, homepage, if you tag a report with homepage, it's going to put that report in the key reports section and on the home tab. If you tag a report with mailer, then you'll be able to use this report for targeting a mailing in the query library. Now, tagging a report with mailer requires user ID as the first and currently only display column. If you tag a report with merge, then you can use this report to personalize your mailing content. Now, it requires the first display column to be a way to match users, for example, like a user ID or a state or a congressional district. So, for example, let's say I created a query that tells me, you took this many actions in 2019. Thank you so much for being a part of this movement. That's not something that you can do with a normal snippet, but you can do it with a merge query. Merge queries allow you to insert any information that you can tie to a user into your mailing. Now, you can often use more than one query type to get the information that you need. And until you've saved your query, you can switch between different query types. So if you can't quite figure out how to make your report work with one query type, try a different one. So, for example, you can often find information about page performance by using either the page query type or the action query type. And I will say that while the query builder is very easy to use, sometimes handwriting SQL code, if that's one of your skills, that can lead to faster running reports and allow you more flexibility in the types of information that you can retrieve from the database. The query builder is very easy to use, but it does not have everything. So when specific query types work best, the user query type is best for specific user contact data or custom fields. Action query types are best for actions on a page. Donation query types are best for fundraising on an aggregate level. Page query types say, how well did my page perform? And mailing query types are, how well did my mailing perform? And before we wrap, I want to say, make sure you look at existing reports, especially ones that are tagged with WAWD standard. Make a copy of reports and tinker with them to make them even better. And if you practice, see what options are available, and don't be afraid to try things out, then you're going to become very comfortable with the query builder and be able to make lots of very useful reports. So thank you for hopping on this video, and I hope you can create lots of great reports. Thanks, everyone.